This conference will now be recorded.
I'm going to go over a few things with the new listing agreement and also the new buyer agency agreement. First, in the listing agreement, fees and costs for services, section 7. Firm's fee has changed. It is now only the amount that goes to the listing side. In other words, the commission split to the listing side. It is not the total amount that it used to be in the old listing agreements. There are several different things you can put in here. Remember, any number I use is only an example. You have flat fee. You may put, for example, 2.5%. That would be the amount that is going to the listing side only. In section C is where you put what, if anything, is going to buyer agents. Now, of course, the seller can refuse to pay buyer agents, or they can pay buyer agents. Right here in the second blank is where you would put in what they're going to pay if it is coming from the seller. The first one is what you're going to put in if it is coming from the listing firm. There's really no difference to the seller. It's going to be a debit on their side of the settlement statement regardless. You may wish to choose seller here because some firms on the buyer side will not work with companies that pay through the listing firm. They will only work if the money is coming from the seller. So if you don't want to have to worry about that, you can just put something in here. For example, 2%. Now, what if the seller is completely negotiable? They don't want to say how much they want to pay buyer agents, but want to leave it completely open. In that scenario, you can put in firm, but put in 0. What that is saying is, and if zip form does not allow you to put in a 0, you hit the space bar, and then it'll let you put in a 0. What that is saying is, right now, seller is not agreeing to pay buyer agent anything. However, if a buyer agent brings an offer they like, they may change their mind and say, okay, fine, I'll pay a buyer agent. In that scenario, you would not have to come back and update your listing agreement, but all you would need to do is use a Form 220 and check the seller pays box, because the seller would be the one paying. So keep that in mind for a seller who wants to be completely negotiable. If a seller tells you, however, I'll just pay 2.5% no matter what, then you can check here and you would put in 2.5%. And of course, this would need to be blank. Now, section D, total cost, firm's fee plus cooperative compensation. In other words, firm's fee, which is in this example is 2.5%, plus compensation, cooperative compensation to other agents, which is 2.5%. That adds up to 5%. Once again, if zip form is stubborn and doesn't want you to put in a percent sign, you can hit the space bar and then use the percent sign. So once again, this number in here plus whatever number's in here, if anything, it could be 0, adds up to whatever's in here. The second area I want to go over is the dual agency section. Now, first of all, the seller can refuse dual agency if they want to. However, we suggest you recommend that they allow dual agency because you may want to work with another Fathom agent. So if they do initial in the second set here, please read this next line carefully. If firm may act as a dual agent, then initial only one line below. You cannot have them initial more than one line. We strongly recommend that they allow designated dual agency. That will allow you to work with another Fathom agent. So the recommended thing to do is to initial here and initial here. If they do not want to do that, they have other choices. If, for example, you already know that you're going to be a dual agent in a situation, perhaps the buyer has already been identified, they could initial in the second set, which says seller does authorize same agent to represent both. If you start here with designated, which is the most likely scenario, and then find later you need to be a dual agent after getting permission from your district director, you would go back in and strike through the initials here and add them here. You cannot initially allow for both possibilities because they can only initial in one of these. So I would recommend that you start with designated, since that's the most likely scenario of the two. And if you find you do need to be a dual agent, you can strike through those, have your client initial in the second spot. The first spot here is a weird situation you will probably never find yourself in, where both agents on each side are acting as dual agents and both are basically neutral parties. That would only be a scenario where both agents know something about one of the parties and do not feel it would be fair for them to exclusively represent the other party. Let's look over at the buyer agency agreement now. Fee for services. This is where you put in how much you're going to make. Whatever you put in here, you cannot make more than what is in here. So for example, if you put in 2.5% and then took your buyer to a home that was offering 3%, you would not be able to accept the entire 3%. You would only be able to accept 2.5%. What we recommend that you put in here is the total amount, the maximum amount that you would expect to make in the market. We do not have a figure that we're going to tell you that should be. You can try to figure that out on your own. Now, the other thing you might want to account for is a bonus. If your buyer may be taking you to new construction, builders offer bonuses quite often. In that scenario, you can check here, put in what you expect the maximum percentage that you're likely to make in the area. For an example, I'm just going to put in 2.75%. And then you can add in plus bonus of whatever figure you think would work. I'm going to put $3,000 only if offered by seller. So what does this do? This allows you to make up to 2.75% and also allows you to accept a bonus of $3,000 if offered by the seller. So your buyer would never be on the hook to pay that bonus. Now keep in mind, you can make less than what you put in your buyer agency agreement and no documentation is needed. You cannot make more, and you cannot come back in here and change this simply because the seller is offering you more. Now, what if, for example, your buyer wants to start where you live, say in Raleigh, but then all of a sudden they decide, wait a minute, I'd like to look in Greensboro. Well, in that scenario, you could come back in here and change it to up your amount, because that's going to be a lot more expensive for you to take them over to Greensboro to look at homes instead of staying in Raleigh. But you cannot make changes to your buyer agency agreement compensation solely because you find them a home that is paying more than what you put in here. So that is why we recommend that you start with the maximum amount you would expect to make. Finally, I want to look at the dual agency section again. Now, these are basically the same. The order is a little bit different, but you're going to be doing the same thing. Recommend that you allow dual agency, or that your buyer allows dual agency, so you can work with other Fathom agents. Have them initial here to allow you so that you can work with other Fathom agents. However, if you already know you're going to be a dual agent, you could start up here. But once again, if firm may act as a dual agent, then initial only one line below. And keep in mind, if they do not allow dual agency by initialing here, you would not initial anything down here because it says if firm may act as a dual agent. Hopefully this will clear up a lot of confusion for some of you. If you have any questions, of course, always reach out to your district director.